It's recording. Okay. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So this is an application of a systems method that some students have learned from me in courses they've taken. And INCOSE is the professional society that I'm a big part of. That's the International Council on Systems Engineering. Now let's see if there we go. Okay, so first off, I'm going to tell you what the engineering grand challenges are. So they were announced by the U.S. National Academy of Engineering in 2008. But they were not just a U.S. proposition. They actually had an international committee that developed them. And the goal was to identify grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century. They came up with 14 goals for improving life on the planet. And then with those 14 goals, they saw 4 cross-cutting themes: sustainability, health, security, and the joy of living. And here are the 14 challenges they identified. So a lot of them you would think of, oh, that's engineering for sure. Solar energy, energy from nuclear fusion, carbon sequestration, and so on. But as you get down the right-hand side, you're sort of crossing a boundary outside of what has traditionally been part of engineering, although engineers are more involved in these things now. So health, medicine, the brain, nuclear terrorism, cyberspace, that could be an engineering thing. It could be a computer science thing. But they get all the way down to advanced personalized learning, which for those of us at Purdue, that's actually an area because we do a lot of online education at Purdue, and we also have engineering education at Purdue. That's something we should be interested in. And then engineering the tools for scientific discovery. That reminds me of a time when I was out at Stanford and a doctoral student in physics who worked at the Stanford Linear Accelerator lived in the same building I did. And he spent most of his time doing engineering design on the detectors for his experiment. He rarely did experiments, actually. He was mostly an engineer. Then maybe he would get 2 days of experimentation out of a 365-day year after all that engineering work. So INCOSE itself has had several initiatives and tried to focus on grand challenges as a professional society. They've been pretty diffuse and tend to have lost momentum after they have 2 annual meetings. So they decided to retreat into a strategy session and try to figure out what could this professional organization do in the area of engineering grand challenges, because everything has a systems aspect that I listed in the list of 14 items. And somehow or another, the systems engineers, they thought, ought to be involved in this. Let's back up a little bit. So one problem they had in the past is they tried to work with non-governmental organizations, just as Purdue in our study abroad programs for engineers works with non-governmental organizations. However, there was a mismatch between when the non-governmental organization wanted to do something and their desire to deliver something on a timeline, and the fact that INCOSE people working on these things generally tend to be volunteers who find it difficult to ramp up at the right time, the right place to contribute, and then sustainably contribute. It's a lot easier with students because people don't mind that students come for a few weeks on their study abroad activity and then go back home. They'll tolerate that. But here's a professional society. They have different expectations. So there was really a mismatch in the way INCOSE members could contribute to activities like this. So they had a strategy session a while back, and a relatively newcomer for INCOSE, Erica Palmer, who has degrees in the social sciences, was appointed to lead. Erica was one of the speakers at our research colloquium a while back. Some of you may remember her. And so the idea was to have a decentralized approach to doing this. And there are certain chapters of INCOSE around the world that actually have a critical mass of people who would be maybe capable of supporting some effort in sustaining a grand challenge and bring the systems engineering perspective. And then they still desire to establish partnerships with non-governmental organizations, but they want it to be something where it's local involvement, people know each other, and trust each other. Also, much less travel. There's certain things that are going to happen where you actually have to be on site. And also the objective is there's a lot of academic research in the systems community spread around the US and Europe in particular. And being able to transition that research into practical use in an engineering grand challenge is another goal of INCOSE. And then they're trying to identify a specific grand challenge for INCOSE. This is the one they've thrown out, but you can see that it's actually more cross-cutting than the specific things that were listed on the grand challenge list. But they, wherever there is something that INCOSE members are working on, doing research in, and in their day jobs doing things about this, they want to discover what that might be. So following up on that, there was a panel last July that was put together, and Tom McDermott, who is the, I can't remember his title, I think he's Chief Technology Officer or something like that for the Systems Engineering Research Center at the Stevens Institute in the US. Al George at Cornell, who has worked a lot with stakeholders in grand challenge problems as a professor and previously as a consultant. Julian Johnson, who works at a consulting firm in the UK and has actually had experience doing health informatics because the UK has a national healthcare system. So he is better positioned to help a society like INCOSE to contribute to healthcare than something that's operated as it is in the US. We might have some inroads in the specific hospitals through students at Purdue, but it's a little bit more diffuse. Cecilia Haskins, a longtime INCOSE member and professor in Norway, is very much interested in personalized learning. And again, Cecilia may be able to tap into some resources in Norway where they're pressing forward nationally their personalized learning. Sham Spada is also at a university in the US. Worcester Polytech has a large systems group there. We've had one of their researchers speak at our colloquium, so she was selected. And they asked me to say something, and I said, I'll tell you what, instead of thinking about how I or students at Purdue are going to contribute to a specific grand challenge, I want to look at the viable systems model of INCOSE as an organization to help explain how INCOSE might be successfully organized to adapt to this rather fluid situation. And I recruited Sri Adas, a recent graduate of Purdue, who's now a master's student at Johns Hopkins in business analytics, to help me put together most of this presentation. So for those of you who don't know what the viable system model, I am going to run through it. Okay, well, viable, what does that mean? It means something is able to live or exist in a particular place and climate, and it's whatever it is, it's workable, practical, feasible, economically, and financially. And then it is actually within the realm of systems thinking, and the person who invented the viable system model, Stafford Beer, he pointed out in his work in the systems community that thinking about the network of relationships rather than the things themselves is the key to being a good systems thinker. So it's not what the individual groups specifically accomplish or do, or the machines. It's really how do these groups of people or machines or whatever you're doing in your system work, it's how they interact with each other in the presence of what could be an evolving dynamic situation, so that you can make something that's viable, that can adapt to uncertain situations. So Beer started out, that's reversed there. PowerPoint will do that to you. It will change the labels between pictures when you use this slide framing. So at the beginning, he worked at United Steel in the UK. He was an upcoming executive. At the end of his career, he was a distinguished scholar. He actually ended his life in Wales, literally off the grid. He did not have power to his house, and he was sort of a hermit at that time. And you can see, here's a picture of him when he reached that status. Okay, and where does this fit overall, at least in the way of thinking that they teach at the business school? Okay, there's strategy. That's things like the business model canvas, which is what we use at Purdue for entrepreneurship strategy. Porter's 5 Forces, which is used in marketing and taught in business schools everywhere as a principal method of working with strategy. And then a lot of systems type thinking and execution is all about lean and Six Sigma and agile. And we would put systems engineering there, where you're trying to design a system to execute a capability. And then lastly, viable system model fits more under the area of organization theory, if you will. And scientific management is what Taylor invented and is pretty much a keystone of what became industrial engineering. Theories X, Y, and Z are styles of management, theories of management, and the viable system model fits there. It's an organizational theory, but it's a very systems-oriented organizational theory. So in his book, The Brain of the Firm, Beer showed how he was inspired to come up with this model. He used the human nervous system as a template for describing how an organization works. So you see the brain up there, and then how it's connected to the rest of the body, and then the body. Let me get my laser pointer out here. So here's sight, hearing, taste, and smell. That's up near the brain. And you have responses overall up there. But then you have these other things, your muscles, your heart, your lungs, your skin. Those are the things that in some ways are connected to the outside world, down in the body, down in the lower part of the body. And that's where the real action is, to actually accomplish things physically as opposed to mentally. Okay, so he mapped that to an organization, and he defined 5 systems: policy system, an intelligence forward-looking system, so that matches the brain, then a management system, and then down at the bottom, you can see he must have had training in electrical engineering, because these look like electrical engineering wiring diagrams. Here are systems that actually perform activities that deliver value to the outside world. And then you need some sort of system to keep the things down at the bottom in balance, in sort of an autonomous, almost non-thinking way. Just like you keep your balance when you go to the gym and you're doing in an exercise class. You don't need higher level policy and strategy thinking necessarily to balance yourself. You're hoping that is something somewhat autonomous. So that's what this system 2 triangles are all about, balancing between various subsystems within an organization. So this is the words that go with what I just said. So the systems that he came up with is policy, and that's the ultimate authority, and that determines the identity of the system or the organization. System 4, as I said, is forward planning, adaptation. System 3, that's management, internal regulation. So that's your line management, if you will. That's trying to optimize carrying out the tasks or activities. System 2 is conflict resolution or stability. That quite often for young people that just come out of school, they're quite often put into a System 2 type job. Basically, they're asked to coordinate some primary activities in production, engineering, and they're given that remit because they know a lot of basic things about different things in these primary activities, and management also wants them to learn about how the company works so that maybe someday they could be promoted up the chain of command. So how does this apply to INCOSE for grand challenges? Okay, here's our overview of the Grand Challenge program that Shreya and I prepared. And we identified that there are 6 systems, subsystems, you might say. System 1 subsystems, headed by various people who are trying to achieve various things. And I think I have a typo on my slide. The 6th subsystem down there, I can't remember who that was, but looks like something happened here in the translation from the original slides. I think we'll have a table later on to identify who that person is that I missed out on there. And then we will go into the details of how this professional society then allows these people to do their job so that they can address the grand challenges. We also put it into an InnoSlate model-based systems engineering model. We'll not go into that detail tonight, but in theory, you could simulate interactions among the people using a model-based systems engineering model like this. Okay, system 1. So their function is to contribute systems expertise to grand challenge problems in partnership with whoever INCOSE might choose to affiliate with. Okay, so here are the people. Jen Mocker from British Columbia is ready to work in clean water. She has contacts in there. As I said before, Cecilia Haskins has contacts in advanced personal learning. Tom McDermott at Stevens, the their security, system security and cyberspace security is something that his university group, the Systems Engineering Research Center, actually has funding. As I mentioned, Julian Johnson works with the National Healthcare System in the UK. Shams Bada is more of a generalist, and she might be able to bring the resources of Worcester Polytech and their faculty that she works with there into a grand challenge problem once there's been a focus on that. And the same with Al George at Cornell. There's a lot of activities at Cornell out of their systems group, and Al could identify a grand challenge that people at Cornell are working on and bring INCOSE people into that as systems experts. The idea is that the suppliers here now are actually, in this case, they're INCOSE members that these people are recruiting to come work on Grand Challenge projects, and the outputs are things that INCOSE members can share. They can run workshops, provide expertise to people working on Grand Challenges who need systems expertise. Okay? So here's a list of everyone who might be considered part of the environment that these people I listed on the previous slide are working with, okay? So there's individual volunteers. The chapters of INCOSE have working groups, particularly there are chapters that are nationwide in the UK and India, Japan, other places that might have a specific group of members working on a particular national or regional problem. There are working groups at the international level of INCOSE. There is a working group on system security, for example, so that cybersecurity challenge would be one that they might be able to participate in. Here's partnerships with non-government organizations that might have funding and that INCOSE can work out relationships with that doesn't tax the volunteers and uses the skills of the volunteers from INCOSE in a way that is effective. Also, academic organizations, there's a lot of research being done on Grand Challenges and people receiving grants, and somehow or another, if they partner with INCOSE, things can happen. And I'll give you an example later on of a successful academic organization partnership with INCOSE that was quite successful. There are the fellows of INCOSE who are world-class experts. And then INCOSE has publications. They have a journal. They have a quarterly technical magazine. And then they also have a committee that could actually establish conferences sponsored by INCOSE and someone who wants to work on a grand challenge. So that's the environment that these people will draw on resources from and deliver outputs to, okay? Tom McDermott is a member of the INCOSE board, and he will hold the budget and establish whatever goals the program might have from a budget perspective, how much they get to spend, and provide overall control. So this budget would be used to allow people to travel, to participate in activities, maybe to pay to set up a conference, at least put a deposit down, to rent a room in a hotel or something like that. So that's what management does. They do budgets and then they lay out objectives for people. Okay, coordination, that's Erica Palmer, is actually the day-to-day coordinator for Grand Challenges at INCOSE, and there's also an administrative office and a publications office at INCOSE that coordinate with people working on Grand Challenges. And then there's a system that Beer put in that's a monitoring system that essentially is receiving signals from the activity that's delivering value to the outside world and recruiting people to participate. And essentially, INCOSE that's an area we identified as a weakness, since it's just a professional society, not a construction project management sort of organization that collects progress information and has not used to having that sort of tasking. What this is for is so that the manager who holds the budget knows fairly far ahead of time that budget is being overspent, or in the case of a lot of INCOSE volunteer activities, underspent, so nothing's getting done. That's what they need, things like that. So we identified that as a weakness. All right, now we move up the chain of command, if you will. So this is the planning system or the intelligence system. So these are typically people who are directors on the INCOSE board. All right, so there is a technical operations director. That's basically all the technical activities that are going on at INCOSE, and the role of this person would be to have a forward-looking understanding of what's available from the community out there of INCOSE people, and let the System 3 managers know that there's a group of people anxious to get involved in something. Tom McDermott is also, in addition to leading up this project as the manager, he is the director of strategy for INCOSE. So, and in particular in his role as a senior researcher at Stevens, he has a lot of contact with people around the world. And if there are external stakeholders that want to see something happen and want to collaborate with INCOSE, he'll know about it before other people might know about it, particularly if some funding's coming down, because he's in that world. They also have a sort of a director of collaborations and agreements, essentially preparing memorandums of agreement. If anyone wants to collaborate with INCOSE, and the formal agreement needs to be set up, Dr. Julia Taylor is actually on the board of INCOSE, and that's what she focuses on. A local person, Lisa Hooverman, who lives in West Lafayette, is the director for communications for INCOSE, and anything to do with press releases and other sort of delivering of information generated internally to the outside world to publicize INCOSE's progress. She's in charge of that. And then finally, the budget. Tom McDermott, as the manager, will be in charge of the budget, but it's actually negotiated by a collection of a committee of the board that actually prepares the budget and balances it between the different parts of the organization. Then finally, at the top is the board of directors of INCOSE. Any mission and vision for this group would be approved by them. Any policies that they might need to establish any organizational roles, and the final approval of the budget, and then authorize the director, Dr. Taylor, to proceed with the collaboration agreement. Then the INCOSE president, who's chairman of the board also, would do the final sign-off on any collaboration agreements. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of interaction shown in these pictures between these levels in the organization. And so the way you use this information is you assess, now that you've defined the organization, you assess how well they're aligned to working with each other, to interacting with the environment, to interacting with each other to produce effective coordination and to be able to react to what's changing. or what needs to be done, particularly when their objective here is to sort of operate locally, to find grand challenges to work on, and then to coordinate it all the way through the large organization and find that there needs to be a way to find funding that involves the president level, board level to fund it that a local organization needs. The VSM can help you analyze the structure of the organization and how well these people interact and how they can effectively do things like that. So overall, we saw that INCOSE is viable and fit for the purpose of the grand challenges. As I mentioned, the accountability and indicators for measuring performance, that's the monitoring or audit system, that's just not there. The good news is that the people they've selected to bring activities into INCOSE to work on are trusted members and would be trusted to manage those relationships at the local level. And of course, as I pointed out, the resources and commitments that any external collaborator like an NGO might have may exceed the capacity of INCOSE volunteers to keep pace with the collaborators, okay? So Dr. Palmer, who's been assigned the coordinator for this, definitely has a good relationship with internal members of INCOSE and coordinating anything they're doing with each other. But exactly how this conflict with the outside world needs to be managed, they still need to work on that. And the idea of an agreement between the INCOSE and any outside groups, that those agreements have to be crafted so that the expectations on the INCOSE volunteers don't exceed their capacity, okay? And what they're being asked to do and their expertise is being properly tapped into, and they're not being asked to do something that they're not experts in. Okay, so that's all pretty abstract, but what is an example of a successful collaboration that INCOSE's done similar to this in the past? Okay, there was something called the Guide to Lean Enablers for Managing Engineering Programs. That's actually a publication. And so the external collaborators to INCOSE were the Project Management Institute, another professional society that actually has a rather large professional staff. And then some researchers at MIT, and that was key. All right. The effort lasted for 2 years. The researchers from MIT were funded on a research project to engage in this. And so they're also academics, so they're willing to work with the volunteers from the Project Management Institute, that's experts in project management, and INCOSE systems engineers who work on large-scale programs, and set up surveys, occasional meetings, say quarterly meetings, where these volunteers could provide their input, but they didn't have to work day in and day out on the activity. The researchers carried the project through. The results were published by MIT, not by Project Management Institute, not by INCOSE. And what's important, was not published by someone like Wiley. MIT publication was a means to get a decent high-quality publication out and make it available worldwide without having to charge people for it, because their funded research supported publishing the research results. So disseminating the results was much more effective because they had a university partner. Now, there were excerpts from copyrighted works from Wiley, that is the publisher for INCOSE when they decide to publish things. From INCOSE itself, any internal documents that aren't widely published, and Project Management Institute. And the Publications Office of INCOSE coordinated that activity. And then this is a technical detail here. This was considered INCOSE technical data, i.e. not an INCOSE technical product. When something is called a technical product by a professional society like INCOSE or IEEE, that's pretty serious business. You're talking like international standards and things like that. And so it would have taken 2 years just to review this report that was published by MIT if they'd run it as an INCOSE technical product. And ultimately, this received a Shingo Research and Professional Publication Award, and that is a worldwide award on Lean Six Sigma. Basically, that's sort of like a Nobel Prize in this area, if you will. Maybe not quite that, but a very prestigious international prize. And as a matter of fact, one of the 2 MIT researchers got a tenured position at a university after this publication. So it was a big deal. Okay, so for those of you out there who are interested in engineering grand challenges, Erica Palmer would like you to contact her, and here's her information. And she is a research scientist in Trondheim, and as I mentioned to you all, she did speak to this forum about a year or so ago, and some of you may know her, may have contacted her before. So she's looking for people who might be interested in contributing as an INCOSE member or as a student member of INCOSE to the grand challenges. Or if you've got research that's going on in your research group around Purdue that seems to be working in these areas that we listed way back at the beginning, and you think that a systems perspective might be a healthy thing to bring in, she might be able to help you and your research group figure out a way to bring some INCOSE fellows in to advise you or to contribute to your activities. So for now, I will stop sharing. And hello again, Sam. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yes.
We can open it up for questions now.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Hi, Dong-Yang.
Real quick, yeah. So thank you for your presentation. So the VSM model and the some other things you showed in your slides they look very familiar to me. I think you covered them in your system classes here at Purdue.
Yes.
So yeah, if there are Purdue people here, I mean, I can ask a little bit for Purdue System Collaboratory. Like they will give you a certificate after completion of a set of required courses that will get you an in-depth understanding of the key concepts.
Yes.
Professor Kenley just covered here.
Yes. So I applied it to INCOSE. Dong-Yang, when you took a class that used this, you worked for the city of Beaver Creek, Ohio, near Dayton.
Yes.
And applied it to a city manager's project. Joseph did it with a local, is it a high school?
It's like a career and technical school.
Yeah, a technical school. Who else has worked? I know Ebekin and Cassandra, it's been so long ago. Oh, Sean McCann, I think he applied it. Was it Leadership Lafayette or was it Lafayette Legal Aid or both?
Leadership Lafayette.
Yeah, I think another group of students the same semester was the Legal Aid at Lafayette also.
Correct.
It was applied to them. So there are just myriad organizations that this is applicable to. and it's a very useful tool to get to understand the organization and then to diagnose what needs to be changed to make it effective for whatever this particular activity is they want to undertake.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really effective for like a range of applications. I know that our organization, we did Aviation USA, and honestly, it's like an organization of largely two people above at and above a system 2 level. But even that they found really, really valuable because they didn't realize how much they had been doing. And so they found it really valuable to see it all mapped out that way, even if at a level of 2 people in an organization.
Yes.
Yeah, I will say the 2-person organization like Leadership Lafayette was challenging, but I think more so it was challenging because the director has a PhD in human factors. And so I think we were getting cross-analyzed while we were implementing the VSM. So it was still a great experience, but it was also I don't want to say it was challenging. It was just a different lens and a different way in which she was answering the questions related to what we were proposing to her.
Yes.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yes, we've had students consult with General Dynamics or Lockheed Martin and with an engineering manager, and similar things would happen. Yes. Yeah, and a focus on long-term sustainability, particularly with nonprofits, can come out of this analysis. Because INCOSE is run by engineers, they kind of get it in some ways, but a lot of nonprofits are these 2 and 3 person executive director is in all 5 levels of the system thing, and they're just it really gets them focusing on here's the near-term issues, but also what sort of changes to make us survive long-term do we need. I don't think any of you had any fundraising issues that came out of your group projects, but some other group projects, the idea of fundraising for the organization ended up being an important System 1 day-to-day activity that they needed to sort of commit to again.
Yeah, I think funding was a part of ours, but at a higher system level. It wasn't necessarily a System 1 activity.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some nonprofits where they put the funding, they decided to put it in as a System 1 day-to-day activity and talk about how could that organization be more effective at fundraising.
Yeah.
There was, what was it? The town of Walton, Indiana needed money for basically flooding because, we're getting more rain these days, and a lot of fields with farmers were coming closer and closer to the edge of town. And they needed to figure out a way to get funding. So when is our next meeting? It's just 2 weeks from tonight. And who is our speaker? I can't remember. We've recruited speakers the rest of the semester. Does anyone remember?
I will have to go.
No.
I will have to go make a deep check. Wow.
Maybe one of the students who's on right now, their advisor.
October 21. I'm thinking it's Dr. Jonathan Day.
Jonathan Day. Oh.
Yes.
Aylin dropped off. Maybe she's off making slides for him now. So Jonathan Day is from the, is it called School of Hospitality or something like that now? Used to be called Hotel.
Yes, Hospitality and Tourism Management.
Yes. His research is in sustainable tourism. And I think Joseph should be interested in this because I believe he uses system dynamics modeling for some of his investigations. So it ought to be very interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll send out information about that probably towards the end of next week. I would just say, just stay tuned for more information on that. I'll get to reach out to him probably tomorrow, and yeah, so there will be flyers will be sent, and emails will be broadcasted to that effect when we get more information. So yeah.
All right. Well,
Hey, Dr. Kenley, I had a question on
Yes.
your model. So, kind of with System 1, I'm not sure if I missed it, but I think how you assigned it was just like the single person, like the leader of that unit.
yes.
But like how I understood how you were describing it was like that, like the base, like operational unit would be the volunteer.
Yeah.
So how does the volunteer fit in with System 1, or is it just kind of like another subsystem?
So the way we perceive this is that volunteers would be recruited to join that leader in an activity. And so in some way, they transition across the interface from being in the external environment to being in the System 1 for a particular activity. So that's our view. It's a very dynamic thing where you're trying to attract people, sort of like Tom Sawyer painting the fence. So because they're volunteers, right? And that's kind of what happened with that other INCOSE project. Those two MIT researchers came to INCOSE meetings. They were kind of the System 1 managers, and they recruited INCOSE volunteers to work on various aspects of that 2-year study. And then the volunteers got their name on the publication.
Yeah.
So,
that's like definitely motivation, but I was just kind of curious because like the problem that you identified at the beginning was that volunteers didn't have kind of that commitment toward the NGO because it's all volunteer based.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the next step would be to try to address some of those kind of underlying motivations and seeing if those could be amplified in some way.
Yeah, and the big hope is the reason I came up with the example was there could be some people with funding who can tolerate working with volunteers who are sporadically available but tap into their expertise. They just have to know that up front. I think previously when INCOSE's tried some of these things with some big NGOs that do water stuff in Africa, building wells and whatever, their schedule didn't match the INCOSE people at all. So, and the INCOSE people, but if they'd had a workshop to work on a system concepts and requirements, say in London for a week at their headquarters, that would have been more reasonable for participation. So the volunteers have to be, it's short duration, meaningful events where they can contribute their expertise is going to be what's going to get them involved, or answering a survey too.
Yeah, I was going to say that like hackathons are like very intense periods.
Yes, something like a hackathon
might work for people's schedules better.
Yes, things like that. They have to be creative on the System 1 people, creative on the events that they negotiate with the larger organizations that might be expecting results. Okay. Any other questions out there? Yes, and I think I think he's got it right that Jonathan Day of Hospitality will be our next speaker. So see you in 2 weeks after the fall break. Enjoy it, everyone.
All right, yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.